Hello. So this is a how to paint better sooner, or at least how to get to the fundamentals sooner, from a beginner, intermediate-ish painter to beginners. So this is catered to beginners, and I'll tell you what the two best things to do are right away, so you know where this video is heading. It's one, the most important thing is to prime smooth. And the second thing is have the ability to block in smooth, flat, monotone colors. Okay, if you do those two things, your painting is going to improve very quickly to the stage where you can start really focusing on becoming a better painter. If you're just having fun painting, then have fun painting, and you should do that. And for every technique that's out there, you should try it and you should have fun and give it a go. When I got back into painting, I was wet blending right away, and I was very good at it. But then you have your hit and miss miniatures. But the thing that will let me improve fastest is literally doing those two things. And I'll explain how to do those two things as we get going. There's a bunch of stuff on this table that I'll also talk about. So the only brush you need is that brush. And I'll talk about why I have this cheap airbrush here, and the paint stripper as well. It's there so I remember. Also, here's the miniature that I've failed at constantly. All right, and we can talk about why I keep failing at painting this miniature. So, why do I think a beginner to beginner perspective is important? So, I was a reasonably high level coach. I'm an educator as well, but that's irrelevant, right? But I spend lots of time teaching and have done it for like 14, 15 years. And there is a memory that sticks with me, and I've always been reluctant to teach people about the sport that I coached unless they were actually in the sport. So if they were part of a team that was looking to succeed in the proper version of the sport, then I'll give them all the technical know-how and all the strategic know-how and all the conditioning. Like I could do all of that, right? But if it was just like park football or kids just wanting to have fun, like if a school came along and, oh, you should teach this sport, I don't like doing it, don't want to do it. And the reason is all that technical knowledge is wasted on them, right? So it's wasted on me to try to deliver it. It's wasted on them because it's something that they're not going to need, not going to use, and it bores them to hear about it. They don't want to know where their feet need to be placed. They don't want to know about anything other than, you know, if you do this, it could kill you, so don't do that. And have fun. They just want to have a run, okay? And that's it, right? And the thing that really dawned on me one day, by the way, I'll put a timestamp where to skip, but the story's gonna be really quick, so I'm not gonna do it, I lied. I got roped into doing like a flag football thing. I've now kind of revealed what sport I was doing. I didn't want to do that. And then I gave them like one thing to do, and it was super simple, really basic, and it would made the actual team more successful. And they wanted that. And then at some point, one of the other beginners said, "Oh, hang on, I think it's important that we just establish what this game is." And it literally was something like, you get this and you put it there, and then that means you're successful. It was so basic that I couldn't even comprehend delivering that basic point. But when I listened to it, I was like, yes, that is actually like really clear, concise, and a perfect way of describing it. And then another person was like, oh, now I understand. That person had been playing for a little bit, like they'd played like several weeks. How they didn't quite understand that, I don't know. But it needed to be told to them by someone else who was a beginner. And in terms of the painting, there'll be lots of jargon, and I've watched videos of good teachers of painting, and it was one of their like 20th video or something. In their first few videos, they had little icons that come up and it would say, where if you said the word like glaze, it'd give a description of what that was. And it would have lots of stuff that are really beginner friendly. And then in this video, which was like kind of aimed at beginners, he was using all this terminology. This is Trevelyan, I'll say it. and he's a good teacher. I think he has. I think he's good at teaching painting. But you see, like in that video that he made, it was about the blood bowl miniatures. Like he says everything right, which is fantastic. But if you don't know what he's talking about, then you're not at that. You can't use that information. He's like, oh, these are the paints that we're using, and he had a shit ton of paints. It's like, okay, the beginner might have the beginner paint set. The beginners might have one single miniature, and that's it. Beginners may have one brush, and it's a really bad brush. Like that makes a difference. And you'll hear like, oh, what brushes do you need? And then they'll talk to an expert. It's like, oh, I can paint with my toes standing upside down. You can use anything, so I do this. It's because you're an expert, right? You are good at it, so you can paint with a toothpick and you're gonna get good results, right? But you can be limited by the equipment that you use. By the way, if you are interested about getting better at painting, you should watch Trevarian's videos, especially his early ones, especially one about what tools that you should use to get better. He's very good. And I believe that he's been teaching properly for a long time. It was just that one video I was like, this is not great. But then I actually look at his other stuff. His video is fantastic. For like an intermediate painter, absolutely fantastic. And if you can do these two things, that video is perfect for you, right? This has gone a long way for those first two things that I said, and that's why I said them at the start of the video, so you don't get roped into this long video and be like, oh, is that it? So, the thing that you should focus on, so do everything that you want, have fun, but if you want to improve, and have the results look okay, then make sure that you prime smooth. So if you prime with a airbrush, which I do, if you prime by hand, which you can do with the same product, if you prime with a rattle can, whatever it is, you need to follow the same steps to a degree. The first one, and is very important, is mix the paint, right? If this thing has some instructions on it, which they are not in English, apply directly with an airbrush at 20 centimeters distance on brush or brush on, okay? You need to read their instructions, but the rattle can one is the one that you probably are using. It says shake the can for like 2 minutes. Shake the can for 2 minutes. If it says the ideal temperature is 20-ish degrees, then you need to warm the can up to that temperature. So the temperature outside will then determine on how far you spray from. If you really want to get into exactly how to prime properly, then you go to the experts, you look it up on YouTube and figure out how to do it. Artist Opus goes over a few of it. But basically, shake the can. Make sure if it says shake for 2 minutes, shake for 2 minutes. You need it properly mixed. If it's cold outside or really hot outside, then you need to change the distance your miniature is from the spray can. So if you're too close, what's going to happen is the paint is going to get stay really wet, and it will start to pool on top of the miniature, and it may pool inside the details, and you lose the details. The paint sits there. Or you'll get these spread, I needed something to show you, but you'll see a paint splatter, and it's spread out a little bit. If you spray from too far away, then what happens is the particle turns into aerosol, and then before it hits the model, it dries, right? And it dries as a clumped particle, okay? And then you'll get texture onto your miniature, or you might get strings, which I am not going to go collect them now, but I definitely have miniatures there that have stringing. This guy had that. So this guy had a bad prime on him. Well, I had a reasonably prime on it, but he had that dryness, and it still came out okay, because I primed like 50 of these at the same time, or close to that, okay? So you can still get good results, and I think I shook the can and still sprayed lots of them, but I still ended up with drying because some of the miniatures were here, some of the miniatures were there, some there, some there, so they're at different distances, right? So I got some stringing, so there was literally like strings of paint hanging off the miniature, okay? Now, if you have texture on your miniatures, and it really isn't going to show up on the camera, so there's no point in me showing you that, although this one, I think the texture on the miniature is why this miniature haunts me, because this one little part, his loincloth, and I think it's actually the metal texture. If there's texture on the miniature, you can't get smoothness. It's really annoying. So like if you glazing, which is using the most watered down, usable still version of paint, right? So it's really, really thin, and you're barely going to see it when you put on. So every time you put on a new coat and you let it dry, and then put on a new coat and let it dry, that should be the smoothest kind of finish, and you should be able to blend a really smooth transition by doing that. It's not important so much, so you don't need to understand that, but it should be smooth. And if the layer underneath is not smooth, then you can see the texture, and it doesn't matter how good you've painted on top of it or what technique, that texture is going to show through. And so you'll look at that and you'll be like, oh, this miniature sucks, or you've screwed up somehow, okay, which can happen in the next step, right? So starting with a smooth primer that doesn't lose any detail, I think will go the most way to improve your painting, because it allows you to do everything else, right? So you are not restricted anymore. So if it was a case of, you know, your miniature had potential, and you know you give it to Terrarian, he can get 100% of the potential out of it, or you give it to me and I can only get 5% of the potential out of it. You scale it down by if it has a bad primer on it. So if it has a really bad primer on it, Terrarian might only be able to get it to 99% perfect. And I would get it to looking like trash, complete trash, that you'd be like, what are you doing, mate? Throw this in the bin. Paint strip it. So you're reducing your potential. So if you're going to do something right, so for everything else, have fun. If you're going to, well, except for one other thing, for everything else, have fun. But the most important thing is, like, okay, I'm going to do this properly. I'm not going to like just wing through this. Is prime it properly. The other thing is, if you're going to spray your miniature, start the spray out on the left or right or whatever, just not on the miniature, and then move across it with a really light dusting, and this is the same for the airbrush. Then let it dry a little bit, and then do it again. So when you're using the airbrush, you will start from the outside. That's whatever. Start from the outside, turn it on, spray across, let it dry. You won't even see it, right? It'll look like you've done nothing at all, but some of the particles have sat onto the model, the plastic or the metal, and it gives the rest of the paint or the primer something to stick to. And then you go over it again, let it dry, go over it again, let it dry. Now, because this stuff dries, like, it doesn't cure fully, but it will dry relatively quick, right? I mean, it could be dry to touch immediately, but you want to give it about like 20-30 seconds, right? And there is a video out there, and if I can find it, I'll link it to you, how to airbrush properly. Why do I have this cheap airbrush on the table though? Why does it matter? Say you are crazy and you bought lots of miniatures. One can of primer could get you through most of it. If you're buying the Games Workshop's ones, for me it's like $33. I think you can get this airbrush for $70. I think I paid 100 and something, but the exact same one with just a different name. It's just a manufactured from China sort of thing. So lots of different companies can just rename it and use it, which I think this thing might be the same as Green Stuff World stuff. I think it's the same sort of thing. It might be more economical to get that airbrush, right? And then, or, right, if you are a beginner and you just really don't want to be spending money because you can't, for whatever reason, you can brush this on, okay? So this is the same surface primer that goes into the airbrush, but you can brush it on. Go to brush it on. And once it dries, it kind of stretches a little bit. So as long as it doesn't look like it's completely obscuring detail, sometimes when it dries, or a lot of times when it dries without losing the detail. But if it looks like it's obscuring detail, it probably is. And that's like $6, okay? That'll get you maybe 8 miniatures, maybe more. Depends what you actually, it should be more. So that's some priming smooth. This is a Raphael 8404, by the way. Cost me the same as a Games Workshop brush. Games Workshop brush that I bought, that cost more than this. I put it in water, didn't touch paint at all. It opened up, and that was it. It was, I tried to use it as a mixing brush because the bristles were everywhere. It was bad at just mixing paint on the palette. I tried to use it as just a big block coloring anything. It just did not work, right? It was a literal waste of money. This, some strands may go out. You can choose to cut them, but I've used this now many times, and it's super sharp because I've got the brush conditioner on there. So if you're a beginner and you got to this part of the video, you're crazy. I don't know anyone who, it's only 16 minutes. I thought it'd be an hour already. That's the only brush you need. The size 1 Raphael 8404. That's it. If you buy the brush cleaner, that's expensive as hell. But you can get any different kind of brush cleaner. You can use a bar of soap, I'm pretty sure. Like, I know this may sound crazy to people, but some people don't want to be spending money because they cannot, so they don't want to spend $30 on a brush cleaner. Because they can get 3 brushes for that money. But if you want to actually look after this, get some brush cleaner. And the reason why I would say you want to look after it is because if you are a beginner and you want to use metallics, you don't have to get a synthetic brush. You can use that same brush, but just make sure you clean it properly. Rinsing the brush in water does not clean it properly. Okay, the paint will be in there. And when you swirl it through this stuff, and you'll see little bits of gunk come out, or you can actually like push them off, pull them off, you'll realize, okay, that your brush was dirty. Water just does not clean it. Okay, as much as you might think that your brush is clean, it's not. So having some brush cleaner does well. That's the tip that I got with the, whatever that is, Master's Brush Cleaner or whatever. But you can get one from Vallejo, which I think does a better job. AK has probably got a good one. AK seems to be a pretty good company from what I've seen. That's the only product I have of theirs, by the way. And the next thing, this is number 2, most important thing, is blocking in smooth, flat colors that don't lose detail. You do that with an airbrush, right? But you're reducing your ability as a painter if you just use an airbrush. But if you only want to paint quickly, then you can use an airbrush. This guy was painted in literally 5 minutes with an airbrush. The brown wasn't. That is bad, and I knew that was going to be bad. I was like, Zenithal with a bad airbrush, not a good idea. But the front looks okay, right? For 5 minutes, that's pretty damn good, to be honest. This guy's red has been highlighted with some glazes and stuff. Not a lot of effort was put into this guy. He was made for the intent of this video, same as this guy here. And I think they look okay, right? So not a massive amount of effort, just clean brush strokes, like, because I used a decent brush. And then blocking in flat colors meant that it looks okay, right? So from that point, I've got my golf fork, mate. I kind of want to show it. I'm showing it because I made this, like, this guy was made for this video sort of thing as well. So he's got the white there. So he's only got 2 colors. The horns have been done and the skin was done lightly, but you can't even see that in the video, so it doesn't even matter. And he looks reasonably okay because the base colors were flat and smooth, didn't obscure any detail, and so it looks okay. And from that point, right, I can highlight, I can glaze, I can layer, I can do all that business Just do random detailing. Don't know what's happened to my screen. It's gone. It's back. And everything can work up from there. So when they talk about, oh, you can get a good effect by glazing, if the color underneath is not one color already, and it's different gradients, then the glazing is not going to do anything of value for you, right? You're just putting more colors into an already messed up miniature. I should have a pretty bad one here somewhere, to be honest. I don't know if you can see it. In that little corner there. These are my newer miniatures. I can't find the older ones. They're all up there. So, how do we do this? Okay. This is the point of this video, is how do you make those smooth, flat colors. So one option was the airbrush, I said that, but we don't want to hold that as a crutch. This is where it comes in, is you need to thin your paints. And what does that look like? They'll, like you'll see it in the videos, like, well, it's going to look different for your paints. The way that I see it, so I use the wet palette, which is good, but you can use it, like, use a plastic palette as well. My room's super dry, right? So on a wet palette, my paint's dry reasonably quick anyway, but you should make yourself a wet palette, right? You can buy one, but they operate the exact same depending on the paper that you put on top of it. When you put thinner or water into it, what you should be looking for is the paint rolling back onto itself. If it looks like a puddle of water, it's too wet. If it looks like it's solid, it's too dry. When you mix it and you start seeing the outer edges draw in on itself, but it's not a puddle, that's when it's starting to look okay. You'll see when they, they'll test paint on their thumbs. If you can see your thumbnail and the lines, like it looks transparent, that's good consistency. But that might be more of a glaze consistency, and it might be okay to paint a little bit thicker than that. So if you can get it so it's a little bit, tiny bit more opaque than that translucent version, that's okay. Then what you want to do is let it fully dry. Then put another coat. Okay, so I'm going to link a video for this because you really shouldn't be listening to me about that part. I'll find it. It's from the guy who used to work for Heavy Metal, I think, at least, Darren. And he just, throws the paint on, doesn't look that great. He establishes how you need to do it. And then like the next shot later, he'll be like, oh, I let this dry, put on a second coat, and it's a smooth, flat color. And that, believe it or not, is probably something that you're missing and you really, really want. Okay? And then once you have that, you can glaze. You can layer your colors in different fancy ways. You can do your edge highlighting. You can do all your pin washing. You can do all the stuff that there'll be videos on how to do it. It's like, this is how you make your miniature amazing. If you didn't have the base beginner fundamental of the miniature was smooth when you started. By the way, the primer doesn't have to be like one single color. It can have like different, like a little bit of a color variation, because the primer is there just for paint to stick onto, right? So it doesn't have to completely cover the model. It should be completely covered, but it doesn't have to be like full, solid, flat color. Ideally it is, especially if you're using a white. But then your next colors should be one single color. And with contrast paints, that obviously is not going to happen because they're not designed to do that. But with your regular paints, that's what you are aiming for. So if you're seeing, oh look, this is like a nice little natural highlight. No, if you actually want to improve your painting, then the highlight should be deliberate, the shadows should be deliberate. Everything that you are doing on the model is from you doing it, not from the paint naturally gravitating somewhere. You're like, oh, that's a cool effect. Like, it needs to be deliberate. I was going to tell you this story about a story from an artist and a bad teacher, to be honest. But the effect on it, the extent of the story was the effect is you. Like the product, even though it looks really amazing, that doesn't matter. What's important is if you're trying to get better, is that you are working towards getting better. If the result is the product, and that's all you care about, then that's fine as well. And getting the best possible product means being the best that you can be, or buying, like commissioning it from someone. She's not, there's nothing wrong with that. This is here because I want to talk about it. So if you are stripping paint from a plastic model, this works pretty well. If you're stripping from a metal model, then BioStrip works pretty well as well. If you're using BioStrip on plastic, there's a good chance that it's going to melt, in my personal opinion, and I have definitely done that. And it will just kind of soften the plastic, and then as you brush it, the brush will do damage to the miniature. So even if you put it on for a little bit. So if you're using this stuff, so far it has worked pretty well on plastic miniatures. So if you've got newer miniatures, this is a good thing. And it's like, I think I paid like $13. So if you're an absolute beginner and you've got one miniature and that is it, and this is where like it annoys me with some like really good, like people who basically get paid to paint, right? They're like, oh, you got to keep that first miniature, keep it as a memory, then just go buy another one. Some of us, I obviously have too many, so I can't talk, right? But I know for a fact when I was a kid, right, I could buy one miniature and that was it. And I had to save up like all my money to get that one miniature. And then when I bought that Citadel brush, when I was a kid as well, I've never had a good Citadel brush, and it turned to wood. That was it. I was painting with wood. So that was pretty not good, right? So some of us can only have that one miniature. And if that's the case, you can get the paint off by stripping the miniature. We live in an age where you can take a photo of your first miniature. You're like, there it is. There's my first miniature. Take a nice photo of it. Wow, it looks bad. I'm glad I kept that. If you're very sentimental about those things, then keep your first miniature. That's fine. But then your next one's whatever. You need to decide what you're going to do with it. But if you can't afford another miniature, you can strip the paint, right? Here's the other thing, is it's okay to keep painting. You're like, oh, this looks okay. I want to see if I can push myself and make it look better. Of course you can. Because if you, in your number 2 step, painted a smooth flat coat, did not obscure any detail, you can put another different smooth flat coat in a smaller space and improve what you've done. You've not obscured any detail, you've not added any unwanted texture to the model. You have like giving yourself the ability to paint on top of it and have no issue whatsoever, right? You've not restricted yourself in any way, shape or form because you've done those 2 things. And so that means if you've painted, like you got smooth primer on the miniature, then smooth colors on top. Doesn't matter how bad you've chosen your colors, or you've put your highlights in the wrong spot, or whatever. Who cares? If it's smooth and it's flat, and when I say flat, yeah, I do mean flat physically, but what I actually mean is it's one single tone all the way across. So there's not a lighter part here and a darker part here, and some paint missing here and there. Like it's just one single tone of color all the way across. If you've done that, it means you can then go back to it in 6 years' time, and hey, it's a clean model. It's fine. And even if you didn't want to strip the paint, you can paint on top of it. Paint on top of paint? Impossible, right? No, not at all. That's what that is, by the way. You definitely see this. This is pretty popular. So, what's the takeaway from this very long video? If you've managed to stay this far, thanks so much. It does nothing for me, but cool. But hopefully it helped you, right? That's why I'm throwing out this random information. prime smooth. So follow all the instructions in the primer. And then once it's dry, paint a smooth, flat coat onto the miniature. I should point this out as well. Then once it's dry, paint the same thing again, and it should turn out as a single flat color. And as long as it was smooth, you've done a fantastic, amazing job. And then what you could do if you're really keen is just dry brush. Then you get all your highlights, and your miniature's amazing. And literally, people like me who paint freaking, you know, leopards on Boingot bounders will look at your miniature that's just black and has one pauldron, which was actually messy. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is amazing. I think this is great. Because it really, like, it doesn't matter. Here's the thing that I should say that should come up from the video is when you paint something, right, if I start painting here on this side of the shoulder pad, I don't want to go back to that spot after I've let it dry for like 15 seconds, 10, 15 seconds, whatever. It depends on your environment. If you're in a really wet environment, it can be longer than that. You have to leave it alone. So if I paint it down here, right, then I will paint up this way, and I do not go back to that spot until it's dry. If it looks like complete trash or you've made it messy, it does not matter. Let it dry. As long as it was smooth, it didn't leave any texture, you can paint over it. So, let me show you something super messy, right? This looks like garbage, right? It does. But it's smooth, so it doesn't matter. I can paint on top of that. So this was just roughly kind of throwing paint on to see what it kind of looks like. I like really kind of rushed this. There was no real care at all. And I know that I could just make that whatever I want still because it's smooth. There's no additional texture on there. And I know I can just put a flat color on top of it. It will not bother me at all. Same with like this is kind of a little bit different, but you see that there's like lighter paint there. They're speckles from the airbrush. I wasn't expecting it to come out that rough. I don't really care, to be honest. But I'm not bothered by that at all because those specks are really like there's no real texture there. So when I put the next coat of paint onto it, it'll be gone. It won't matter, right? So you need to understand. Let's have some red dudes right next to each other. Look at this. The troll ripped off our brave Space Marine captain's arm off. That troll's probably going to die still. Like, it's a Space Marine. Let's be fair. Doesn't matter like how messy it is. Let it dry. If it's smooth, you'll be able to paint over it. Okay, so take from that what you want. Okay, the other thing you can do as a beginner, and this is the other reason why I painted this guy for this video in particular, is get paints that help you. Right, this is Sunset, Avalanche Sunset. I think Ultramarine Grey is kind of the same. It just covers really well. Right, so you can get wins really easy by using a better paint. If I use like cool yellow Chimera on like because this would have been I can't remember what the base coat of this was, the undercoat. I want to say it was red, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I don't know. I think this was airbrushed as well. Right. I've only airbrushed like 3 miniatures. This one, those trolls. This guy wasn't. That's why he's there. So the Sunset, Avalanche Sunset covers really well. On top of white, not so bad, obviously. But take your wins. If you find paints, or you can watch those videos and they talk about, oh, this is the best paint I've used of this color. They know what they're talking about, right? They're actual kind of professional painters. You should probably think about looking to getting those paints. because they're easy wins. Okay, if you're going to get a spray primer, there's going to be different opinions about this. Black goes on the smoothest, white goes on the worst, right? You're more likely to get texture with a white paint. This one was a white paint. I can feel the texture. Like if I run my finger around the rim here, I can kind of feel it a little bit, but it's not that bad. And that's the base. So you're going to get more texture with a whiter primer than if you don't use a white primer. So take that into account. So if you're using a white, you need to follow the instructions perfectly. But also you should turn the can upside down, spray it until it's clear aerosol, otherwise it's going to jam. You wasted $30, and that was one of the reasons why I ended up buying the airbrush. So a very long video about two things, right? But I put those very two things at the very start of the video, so if you stuck around, thanks. Otherwise, if you have questions, I only have like 0 real viewers, right? So I've got X amount of subscribers. They're from my coaching days and people who are trolling me. So there's no real subscribers. So if you do have a question, I'm going to see it, easy to answer. Don't think I was allowed to use that, which does that count as print media from Games Workshop? Because you're not allowed to show that stuff, I don't think. Anyway, that's it. That's the end of this very long video about two things. Look at my keyboard, guys. It's filthy.